Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism. With me today is Dara Horn, an award-winning author whose recent book, People Love Dead Jews, Reports from a Haunted Present, is a must-read. Her articles appear in publications throughout the world, and she lectures and teaches on a wide range of topics relating to Judaism, global Jewry, and Zionism. Please welcome award-winning author Dara Horn. Hi, Dara. Welcome to ZTV, our Zionist studios. I really thank you for coming on our show today. A fascinating guest that you're going to be because of your writings, your history, your connection. And I just finished reading your book that People Like Dead Jews. A real remarkable kind of dark humor. What made you write a book entitled that?
Well, first, just thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I spent 20 years not writing this book. My previous 5 books are all novels. They all deal really deeply with Jewish history. I also have a PhD in Hebrew and Yiddish literature. So in all of my work, it was always really important to me to focus on Jewish experience from the inside. And I was so attached to this idea that I even, when I would speak to public audiences, I often would say to my audience, at a place like Barnes & Noble or wherever, how many people here can name 3 concentration camps? And that's something a lot of readers can do. I would then ask those same readers, how many people here can name 3 Yiddish writers? A lot fewer people can do that. But the problem is, of course, 80% of the people murdered in the Holocaust were Yiddish speakers, famously literary culture. I was really asking people, why do we care so much how these people died if we really don't care how these people lived? I now look back at that and I feel like I was a little naive because I feel like I didn't quite appreciate then the large role that dead Jews play in a non-Jewish world's imagination. And that's really what I'm exploring in this new book, People Love Dead Jews. My feelings about this started to change a few years ago. And if you like, I can go into detail about how that happened. But basically, my new book is really just exploring this larger role that dead Jews play in a non-Jewish world's imagination. And that was kind of the topic I was avoiding for 20 years before that.
What I found fascinating was the first chapter was this chapter about you as a child, not speaking up when you were at the spelling bee and there was the 2 non-Jews that were kind of shocked that you were a Jew and didn't and asked you questions, yet you knew the answers and you didn't speak up. And as you progressed through the book, your voice and really the voice of the Jewish people came out. It was a leadership, really development book when I read. That's how I saw it. Do you agree?
There are 2 twin messages in this book that are really intertwined. And one is that people tell stories about dead Jews that make them feel better about themselves. And then the second piece of that is that living Jews have to erase themselves in order to gain public respect. So that incident that you talked about that I, at the beginning of the book and sort of encountering this kind of ignorance and really not knowing how to respond. And then what I did for the 20 years as an adult, like sort of just avoiding this problem, I think was a part of that. And what the book then ultimately comes to this larger conclusion is that, part of the inherent elements of being Jewish in a non-Jewish society is this sort of ambient attitude of the non-Jewish society that you're required to erase yourself. And that is sort of the baseline admission to the society. And I have a lot of stories in the book that illustrate that point.
So, because on our Zionist studios, we have constantly had guests and talked about the word Zionism, which was taken away from us, the beauty, its meaning. And it was taken away from us because we stayed silent. We didn't know what to say. We weren't informed. People said it was about, terrible things about what the Jewish people are all about. And instead of celebrating it, we sort of kept quiet. So that's when I was reading your book and talking, and as you're speaking, that's what I was taking from it as well, is that if you don't want to learn, and if you don't learn, you will be silent. And if you just learn, you should be proud and talk up and not about just dead Jews, but about how great we are.
Well, I think, honestly, to go to your point about, the misuse of the idea of Zionism, this actually is, it's much deeper and more insidious than you suggest. It isn't just about, Jews who haven't happened to know very much about it. There's a part of the book where I talk about this, and the book really just actually doesn't really speak that much about Zionism and doesn't really talk much about Israel. But what a lot of people don't know, and this I do go into a bit in the book, is the origins of the idea of anti-Zionism is from the Bolsheviks from 1918. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, the Bolsheviks are consolidating their power and waging civil war in the former Russian Empire. And they want to get the Yiddish-speaking Jewish masses, the famed proletariat of the former Russian Empire, on their side. And they created these Jewish sections of the Communist Party whose job was to spread Marxist propaganda among Jews of the Russian Empire. And their slogan was, "We are not anti-Semitic, we are just," wait for it, "anti-Zionist." This is in 1918, right? I mean, this is 30 years before the founding of the State of Israel, right? I mean, this is not about Israeli politics. And, and by the way, we're Bolsheviks, so we're also anti-religious. So, but, we love Jews. We just, basically are not allowing you to have any expression of Jewish culture at all. In the process of not being anti-Semitic and only being anti-Zionist, the Bolsheviks managed to persecute, imprison, torture, and murder tens of thousands of Jews. Later, Soviet Union spreads this message to their client states in the developing world, certainly in the Arab world, also in Latin America, later to North America in sort of progressive circles in North America, to college campuses and things like that. I mean, and that's why, you encounter this belief in North American college campuses in 2022. It literally comes from the Bolsheviks in 1918, and people just are really just not aware of that history.
So in 1918, being not anti-Semitic, just being anti-Zionist, how did that work out for our Jewish people?
I mean, and also anti-religious. Well, so right. What the Jewish sections of the Communist Party then did, because they weren't anti-Semitic, but they were just anti-Zionist and also, by the way, anti-religious. What that looked like was shutting down every Jewish organization in what was becoming the Soviet Union. So that's like everything from synagogues to sports clubs, arresting all the leadership, sending them to gulags. When making these organizations illegal didn't work, they then burned their offices to the ground. This was a terror campaign, and was highly successful because, they repressed Jewish life in the Soviet Union for until the 1990s. So, that's the legacy of that experience. And in the book, I trace that back to a more, and this, maybe it will be more resonant to our present experience for some of us. I trace that's a strain of anti-Semitism that I discuss in the book. I talk about two patterns of anti-Semitism in the book. I name them after the Jewish holidays that celebrate triumphs over them, Purim and Hanukkah. So the way I describe this is Purim anti-Semitism is this very clear thing where there's, big bad guy comes along and is like, let's kill all the Jews. No ambiguity, super clear what's going on. But then you have the Hanukkah form of anti-Semitism. If you recall the Hanukkah story, there's no point in the Hanukkah story where anyone's like, let's kill all the Jews. Doesn't come up. Instead, you have this Hellenized empire that takes over ancient Judea. And at first, it's like this soft persuasion where they're just like, our culture is cooler than yours. And, now you're our vassal state and, you're going to be part of this awesome Hellenized culture. And the Jews in Judea really felt pressured to go along with this. The Jews in Judea, and my example I give in the book is they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, which was, Greek athletics it wasn't just, like being in the NBA. This was like, as part of the religion. It's very important in the culture. And if you've ever been to an art museum, you know that Greek athletics were played in the nude. And they had to recruit teenage Jewish boys to play in these Greek games in Jerusalem. And these teenage Jewish boys had their circumcisions reversed in order to participate in these Greek games. And what's interesting to me about this is that at that point, no one's making them do that. It's just that that's what you had to do to matter in this society. And so there's this editing that's going on from a non-Jewish society that's telling you how you're allowed to be Jewish. And of course, it's 5 years later, this regime outlaws circumcision. So, I think that there's this sort of thing that where Jews are asked to erase themselves in order to be part of a non-Jewish society. And I think that that's more analogous to a lot of the way that public conversations are changing about, how you're allowed to be Jewish in public in non-Jewish societies.
You're talking, and I'm thinking about your book, and I'm thinking about, you talk about Yiddish culture, and you talk about all the deaths from the Holocaust that killed the culture. And when you go to Warsaw and you go to the Jewish cemetery, one of the really magnificent parts of that cemetery was of all the writers and all of the actors and the poets and the people who were part of building a great conversation with our people are the ones that are really in the front and center of that cemetery, because it was so important to celebrate our culture, to celebrate who we were, our writings, our conversations. And, the Holocaust, and you talk about, people like dead Jews, but Jewish culture, I think you're awakening to say that we can't allow it to die.
Yes. And that's something I've worked on, for my whole career. All my novels are, very deeply involved in Jewish history and culture and religion and texts. And I make those things accessible to a general readership in my novels. But you're absolutely right. I think that there's sort of this problem that we have when we teach anti-bigotry education in the United States, and you see this often in the way that Holocaust education is taught in the United States for a general audience, where there's this message which is like, what's so tragic about the Holocaust is that all these people were murdered, and these were people just like you and me. I mean, the reason you shouldn't hate Jews is because, Jews are just like everyone else. And I think the problem with that messaging is that Jews spent 3,000 years not being like everyone else. Right? I mean, this is a distinct culture that's like a counterculture that runs through the whole history of the West. And in a lot of ways challenges the whole history of the West. And, you see this sort of attempt, especially in Holocaust education, to sort of really emphasize like, oh, look, these are kids just like you and me. And the problem is, like, the Nazi project was not just about murdering 6 million Jews. It was about eliminating Jewish civilization. And I'm thinking, like, why are we participating in that erasure by not sort of emphasizing the amazing creations of Jewish civilization in Europe, and which of course continue in the diaspora and in Israel today. And I think that it's sort of has been subsumed into this, plea for, empathy from a non-Jewish audience by claiming, oh, this is just people like you and me, as opposed to like, no, this is an amazingly rich civilization that challenges a lot of what non-Jewish civilization has presented and produced. And, to me, that's sort of that's that second corollary of people love dead Jews, is that living Jews have to erase themselves and have to erase what's distinct about their civilization in order to gain public respect.
when I was reading the book, we at Jewish National Fund constantly talk about positive Israel. The positive message is that, the oy vey Judaism, the oy vey Israel, and, support Israel. It's on the brink of annihilation. Support Israel. We don't know if it's going to be there tomorrow. Support Israel because it's going to be attacked by everybody. It's like selling a negative to try to get to the positive. And I love your words because, yes, we got to remember and we have to know, but we also should be knowledgeable about that wonderful past and also celebrate what we're doing today and what we could do tomorrow.
Well, and I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive. What you're talking about is what the 20th century Jewish historian Selo Baron called the lachrymose view of Jewish history, lachrymose meaning being full of tears. And he was pushing back against that idea and said, we need to be looking at this sort of vast story of growth and development in Jewish history that isn't contingent on these atrocities. I actually don't think those two things are mutually exclusive because I think that you can't look at Jewish history and honestly, in an honest way and ignore those atrocities and tragedies. But what I find amazing about Jewish history is the creative resilience that you have in Jewish history after these calamities. That to me is what defines Jewish history, is this post-traumatic growth. That this is a post-traumatic culture, and not from one event, but from many events. And then becomes those disasters become opportunities where people, instead of dying out, it becomes an opportunity for the culture to reinvent itself. The story I tell in the book, at the end of the book about this, is from the Talmud about the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans in the year 68 CE. This is, as some of your listeners will know, 70 CE is when the temple is destroyed. A couple years later, the revolt is crushed. The Jewish revolt against Rome is crushed. This is the beginning of thousands of years of exile. But there's this moment in 68 CE where this Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai has himself smuggled out of the siege city of Jerusalem in a coffin. And he has himself brought to the headquarters of the Roman general Vespasian, and convinces the Roman general to allow him to build an academy for Torah scholars in a small town called Yavne. And it's only because of that moment, because he's able to sort of establish this center for Torah scholars outside of Jerusalem, that this civilization is able to continue. Because in the ancient world, when your center is destroyed, your temple is destroyed, your capital, your center of worship, your people are exiled, that's the end for most ancient civilizations. And the only reason it's not the end for the Jews is because there was this moment where somebody took the initiative to create this, to basically create something new out of this tragedy, and to create a sort of a new form of Judaism that could live beyond the temple. And I think you see that in modern Jewish history as well. My favorite example of this is the revival of Hebrew. When you think about that, there's an ancient language that was it was a dead language that wasn't spoken for thousands of years, which is then, today is the native language of 7 million people. It's an unprecedented story in world history.
Well, I think that goes, with that story, that it's not mutually exclusive, and it's about even Israel. I kind of cringe when I hear, well, Israel was created out of the ashes of the Holocaust, and I like to say, no, Israel was created despite the ashes of the Holocaust. That we survived and we move forward, and we're doing great things, and the tragedy is something to remember. But we keep doing things like the rabbi did.
I'm Zoe, and I'm from Dream Israel, an incredible teen travel initiative at Jewish National Fund USA. Let me tell you what Dream Israel is. Through this initiative, any high school student can receive a grant of up to $7,500 to put towards their study abroad program in Israel with one of Jewish National Fund USA's academic partners. How do you earn this grant? All you need to do is fundraise for a Jewish National Fund USA philanthropic project in Israel.
Without this Dream Israel grant, I would not be able to be here in Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel, for making my dreams come true.
Take the trip of your dreams with Dream Israel and Jewish National Fund USA.
Tell the audience some of the stories of when you've been challenged and some of your response.
Well, I think it happens less when in a context where I'm teaching a class, because in a class you build rapport, you build relationships with students. But I do speak frequently at colleges and universities around the United States. And then it does occasionally happen that people will, ask provocative questions, which I welcome. But what often happens, and a lot of the times those questions come from a place of ignorance rather than malice. And that's where you have a real opportunity to engage with people. I mentioned earlier that sort of, oh, can't you be anti-Zionist and not be anti-Semitic? And, when I get asked that question in colleges, I respond with this, where I say, I don't think you're aware of the history of this slogan. And how this slogan was sort of a way for non-Jewish societies to define how Jewish you could be. I've also had students ask, they said like, oh, well, my professor said that, Jews can't be discriminated against because Jews are white. And I'm like, okay, there's like 10 things wrong with that statement, but let's just, let's pretend that there aren't 10 things wrong with that statement. Take it at face value. I would assume that your professor also would say to white LGBTQ people that, of course, they can't be discriminated against because they're white. And I said, there's this thing that we do that you're not, you don't tell a minority group how they get to experience the world. I said, imagine if you went to LGBTQ people and said to them, we love you. We completely accept you. We are not homophobic at all. And we're so glad that you're here. And we're so glad that you're out. And we're welcoming to you in every possible way. And the only thing we ask is that you never bring your partner with you anywhere ever. But we love you and we accept you and we're not homophobic at all. I mean, I would hope that most people would see that that's, a disgusting way of dehumanizing someone. And I think that when I frame it that way for students, that there's something that clicks, where they understand, like, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And that's one, because I often find that, when you engage with students, the main thing that I've discovered, and this really goes to your question, is when students will often ask this question where they're, something, and they'll frame it as like, something about Zionism or something about Israel. And what I say to them is, I'm happy to have a conversation about Israel with you. I have a PhD in Hebrew literature. I've taught Israeli history numerous times. But I'm not sure why we're pretending that we're having a conversation about Israel when we're not. Because when a 15-year-old girl posts Shabbat Shalom on TikTok and then is flooded with trolls that are writing hashtag free Palestine, UBITCH, that's not a conversation about Israel. And I do not understand why I should be required to pretend that it is. And I think when I approach it that way with students, people are really taken aback, and because they haven't heard those kinds of answers before. They're expecting you to answer with some like list of talking points about Israeli history, which, I mean, I love talking about Israeli history, but that's when the people who are asking you these questions are not actually talking about Israel, then I don't see why I need to either.
See, that's an important lesson, and I always talk on the show to people about leadership, people like you who have that opportunity to not only educate, but also to inspire others to learn more and to do things. And you talk, in your writings and in your book about good intentions. There's a lot of good intentions out there, but roads are made and pathways are made by even mistakes and moving forward. And so give us some leadership lessons on how to be an activist, how to stand up, educate yourself. Yes. What does it take inside of you to make that decision that you're going to even, answer the question?
The cost of not answering it is much higher than the cost of answering it. And also what other people stand to gain from this conversation, because one thing that I've discovered, as I said, is that there's so much more ignorance than malice. And that when especially with non-Jewish audiences, when they learn even anything about this amazing resilience of Jewish culture, it immediately has an enormous impact on them, because people can see how extraordinary this Jewish story really is. I'm going to give you one, I don't do a lot of uplift. I mean, I wrote a book called People Love Dead Jews, but I'm going to give you one uplifting story here about this, which comes from my academic work. A few years ago, was at a conference for Hebrew scholars in the United States. It was it's an academic conference at the University of Seattle. Pretty much everybody there was a person who's, American Jews or Israeli Jews who are teaching Hebrew at various institutions around the United States. And except there were three people at that conference who were sitting in the back of all the sessions, and they're taking very careful notes. These people were from the Wampanoag Nation. The Wampanoag Nation is, these are Native Americans with origins in eastern Massachusetts. These are the people whose ancestors encountered the Pilgrims. And they were at this Hebrew conference because their goal is to revive the Wampanoag language as a spoken language. And the Wampanoag language hasn't been spoken in about 250 years. And they were at this Hebrew conference because as they said to us, Hebrew scholars, they said, we want to know how you did it. Because Hebrew is the only language that's been successfully revived, from being a totally dead language to, as I said, now being the native language of 7 million people. It's got, TV shows and they're like, we want to know how this is possible because, we're looking at you and we see that it is possible. And I think that there's this sort of message of hope and resilience that comes from the Jewish experience, which is very obvious to anyone who learns even the slightest thing about this history and this culture. And that I think that, the Jewish people have a lot to offer to the world in this sense of sending this kind of message of hope and resilience, which, is really badly needed today.
Powerful story. Dara, I'm going to have you close with the story, though. Your daughter went to Alexander Muss High School in Israel. You are an Alexander Muss High School alum, but you, at 14 years old, you wrote an essay on Israel. You made your first trip to Israel. I want you to share a little something about that essay and then landing in Israel, from the essay to the reality to even today. How does that come all together into a circle?
So yes, some of my first published pieces I ever wrote were about trips to Israel I took when I was growing up. What motivates me as a writer is a deep awareness of being trapped in time. Sort of the experience of being immortal in a world that outlasts us. This is something I thought about since I was a child. I used to get into bed at night and think, this day that just ended is over. Where did it go? And on my first trips to Israel as a young person, I discovered where those days went. In a very literal sense, in Israel, they're underground, right? Because there's this amazing archaeology where you can sort of go down underground and find all these layers of civilization. And what you also find within Jewish tradition is all those layers of layers of civilization and layers of time that are preserved, right? I mean, if you look through like the Siddur, the prayer book is this like time capsule of people's hopes and expressions from, thousands of years. And when I participated in Alexander Muss High School in Israel, we literally went down into those archaeological digs. We looked at the history of Israel in chronological order, right? At the beginning of the program, we were visiting, archaeological sites, looking into biblical history. And by the end, we're visiting army bases and robotics factories and things like that. Sort of peeling back all of those layers of that civilization in a very tangible way. And I now feel like there's this, I get to experience this in time as well in my own family, because now my daughter has also participated in Alexander Muss High School in Israel. And so I know that she's also had that experience too, of that historical consciousness that comes alive in a person and in a whole society.
Wow. I don't know where our 30 minutes went for our show, but I know that your voice is peeling back history, but also giving us the wonderful culture and arts and Yiddish and Hebrew and just inspiration. So I want to thank you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you from that 14-year-old who wrote an essay from the first chapter in your book, and everybody has to go, if you haven't read it, you have to read it, from that young girl who was questioning how to respond, to helping us respond to the world at large. Dara, thank you for being the leader for the Jewish people.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work that JNF does in building future leaders.
To watch this and all of our past episodes, go to ZTV, our Zionism Studios YouTube page, and subscribe to get notifications.